Grade 10. Welcome to the beginning of what's gonna be a very long series. Okay, so it's fourth quarter, and we are going to embark on our final book together. So this is our final journey. I've been teaching you literature for several years now. We've read 3 to 4 books in a year, and we are nearing the end of our journey together. No, we are nearing the end of our relationship as a literature teacher and literature students. And of course, this is the final book. This is our final story. And of course, it has to be special. So I'm not gonna allow the final story we read together to be done separately. We've kind of been denied the blessing of reading together, no, for a whole year, and although the reading vlogs and the discussions and just the knowledge that we're reading the same book has been a comfort, I think for the final book, we have to go through it together, okay? And my way of doing that is for us to, for me to provide you with a series of videos. This is gonna be a series of me reading the book out loud to you, okay? So this is gonna be a series of videos where I'm reading the entire book to you. So you'll feel like we're in a classroom or I'm in your room and I'm actually narrating it for you. No, you should have your own copy of our final book ever, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, okay? And so look forward to this. This is one of my favorite books, and it's one of our favorite books to read with our class. And I'm saying our because Teacher Kiara's part of this. Teacher Kiara and I are gonna alternate chapters. Sometimes even we are going to read it together. Okay, there are some chapters in which Teacher Kiara and I have to be together, and we actually filmed this during the height of those videos. No, we filmed it in the height of Corona. And so we also didn't see each other for those months, and we had Zoom calls before we even had Google Meet. We had Zoom calls where we were reading the book together. All right, so that's one of the things we'll be doing in fourth quarter. I'm gonna upload these read-alongs, no? Because again, it's a read-along. You're supposed to have your book with you and watch the video or listen to the audio. Sometimes it's gonna be audio clips. And you're gonna read along as I read it out loud to you. Because, I don't know, it's just different when you actually have someone reading to you, and I wanna be there. I wanna pause in the important parts, and I wanna call your attention in the important parts, and I want it to feel like we're really reading it together. Okay, so again, that's what we're doing. I'm gonna upload a couple of videos every week, and we're gonna go through A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, our final book together, one of my favorite books of all time, as well as Teacher Kiara's. I read this for the first time in Teacher Kiara's class when I was her lit student and she was my lit teacher, and we have carried our love for this story for how long? Probably more than a decade. And now we're teaching it together to your homeroom teacher and your lit teacher. We're gonna read this together. Okay, so before we start, just a very brief introduction into Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is one of the greatest English authors ever. Okay, so he is British, and he is considered to be one of the greatest writers of England, but also one of the greatest writers of the English language. He has several books. Okay, he has several books. Obviously, A Tale of Two Cities. He has Great Expectations. He wrote A Christmas Carol, David Copperfield, Oliver Twist. Okay, and several other books. But my personal favorite of his good is A Tale of Two Cities. For me, nothing even comes close to how great this novel is. Okay, and it's called A Tale of Two Cities because we go back and forth between two cities. Okay, we go back and forth between England, and we go also to France. So it goes back and forth between these two places, and that's kind of, this story is so good. Get ready for adventure, and get ready for romance, get ready for drama, get ready for comedy. Charles Dickens delivers it all good in this saga that goes back and forth between England and France, okay? And I always tell you this, good guys, I always tell this to you, the first few parts of a book are always the most difficult. When you're starting a new book, you're getting used to the writing, and you're getting used to the way the writer says things, no? And you're entering into a new world, and the language is different. You're getting used to the language. So expect a little bit of difficulty in starting out, but that's why I'm here with you. And also, guys, we actually have videos for all of the chapters already, except for the first 4. So, the first 4 we were able to read with the previous class face to face, and then that 2 weeks that turned into a year happened, and we had to do the rest via video, no? Via being online. And so I have to shoot the first 4 chapters to complete the book. Alright? But the first 4 chapters, this is present Teacher Ing Ong, and I'm happy I get to introduce the book to you in the present. Okay, so we're gonna start. This book, guys, it's actually divided into 3 books. Okay, so there are actually book the first, book the second, and book the third. And we're obviously gonna start with book the first. Recalled to Life. That's the title of book the first, Recalled to Life, chapter 1, The Period. Okay, and what's very cool about this, guys, about this book, good, is that the thing about Charles Dickens is that he actually he wrote in a unique format. The thing about Charles Dickens is he would write for magazines, for newspapers, for monthly editions. Okay, he would write for monthly publications, and so he would write a chapter for his story and release it in, like, let's say the January edition of a publication, and then he would write chapter 2 and release it 2 weeks later. Okay, and then 2 weeks would pass, and then he'd release chapter 3. So he wrote this in installments. So it's actually a lot like a TV show, okay, where he would release chapters kind of episode by episode. He wouldn't release the full book right away. He would release it chapter by chapter, and so people had to wait for his chapters. People had to wait to find out what happened, and it's only after the whole story was told, after several months, sometimes even years, okay, it's only after the full story was told that he would then have it published as an actual book with a complete story, you know? So it's actually cool that the thing about Charles Dickens is he kind of wrote like a TV show where he would release chapter by chapter, season by season, and it's only after it's all done then he would put it together and have it published as a book. So expect some cliffhangers. That's actually where the term cliffhanger came from. In one of Charles Dickens' stories, he ended a chapter with a man hanging off a cliff, and that's where he cut it, and people were freaking out because they had to wait 2 weeks until they would find out what would happen. And that's where the term cliffhanger came from. Just a fun fact, okay? So let us begin, okay? Chapter 1, The Period. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. Okay, so we begin with him describing the time, okay? What the time is like, and it really shows that the time was horrible for some people and very, very wonderful for others, okay? The extremes of this time were so strong. The rich were very, very rich. The poor were very, very poor. The privileged were very, very privileged. The poor were very, very... the miserable were very, very miserable, okay? There were a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face on the throne of England. There were a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face on the throne of France. In both countries, it was clearer than crystal to the lords of the state preserves of loaves and fishes that things in general were settled forever. Please read along, by the way, okay? You should have your book open with you as we're going through this. It was the year of our Lord 1775. Spiritual revelations were conceded to England at that favored period. As at this, Mrs. Southcott had recently attained her 25th blessed birthday, of whom a prophetic private in the Life Guards had heralded the sublime appearance by announcing that arrangements were made for the swallowing up of London and Westminster. Even the Cock Lane Ghost had been laid only a round of dozen years, after rapping out its messages as the spirits of this very year last past, supernaturally deficient in originality, rapped out theirs. Mere messages in the earthly order of events had lately come to the English crown and people. From a congress of British subjects in America, which, strange to relate, have proved more important to the human race than any communications yet received through any of the chickens of the Cock Lane brood. Okay? Now, again, first few parts are gonna be the hardest. Stay with me. I know there's a lot you don't understand. Go with it. Dickens is basically just describing the historical period, okay? It going on in both England and France. So he's setting the scene. Be patient, okay? I think a problem with a lot of the media now, with Netflix and YouTube and entertainment medias now, is that we tend to skip it. The moment we feel a little bit bored, we click on the next video and we skip it, and we don't really give something a chance unless it instantly entertains us or gratifies us. But the nice thing about books is it teaches us to be patient, and it teaches us that great things are worth waiting for. France, less favored on the whole as to matters spiritual than her sister of the Shield and Trident, rolled with exceeding smoothness downhill, making paper money and spending it. Under the guidance of her Christian pastors, she entertained herself besides with such humane achievement as sentencing a youth to have his hands cut off, his tongue torn out with pincers, and his body burned alive, because he had not kneeled down in the rain to do honor to a dirty procession of monks which passed within his view at a distance of some 50 or 60 yards. It is likely enough that, rooted in the woods of France and Norway, there were growing trees, when that sufferer was put to death, already marked by the woodman fate to come down and be sawn into boards to make a certain movable framework with a sack and a knife in it, terrible in history. It is likely enough that in the rough outhouses of some tillers of the heavy lands adjacent to Paris, there were sheltered from the weather that very day rude carts bespattered with rustic mire, snuffed about by pigs and roosted in by poultry, which the farmer, Death, had already set apart to be his tumbrils of the Revolution. But that woodman and that farmer, though they worked unceasingly, worked silently, and no one heard them as they went about with muffled tread, the rather forasmuch as to entertain any suspicion that they were awake was to be atheistical and traitorous. Okay? And so, in this paragraph, basically Dickens describes that in France, he mentioned that they were making paper money and spending it. So France kept spending, and not only were they spending, they were very, very cruel. Okay, it mentioned about a child who had his hands cut off and his tongue turned out with pincers and his body burned alive just because he did not kneel in respect, okay, to people higher in society. So France was splurging money and being very cruel to their poor. Alright? And then Dickens adds a metaphor of fate and death. No, they're a woodsman and a farmer, and they are working. They are working quietly, but they are working. Fate and death. In England, there was scarcely an amount of order and protection to justify much national boasting. Daring burglaries by armed men and highway robberies took place in the capital itself every night. Families were publicly cautioned not to go out of town without removing their furniture to upholsterers' warehouses for security. The highwayman in the dark was a city tradesman in the light, and being recognized and challenged by his fellow tradesmen, whom he stopped in his character of the captain, gallantly shot him through the head and rode away. The mail was waylaid by 7 robbers, and the guard shot 3 dead, and then got shot dead himself by the other 4, in consequence of the failure of his ammunition. After which the mail was robbed in peace, that magnificent potentate, the Lord Mayor of London, was made to stand and deliver on Turnham Green by one highwayman, who despoiled the illustrious creature in sight of all his retinue. Prisoners in London gaols fought battles with their turnkeys, and the majesty of the law fired blunderbusses in among them. Loaded with rounds of shot and ball, thieves snipped off diamond crosses from the necks of noble lords at court. Drawing rooms, musketeers went into St. Giles's to search for contraband goods, and the mob fired on the musketeers, and the musketeers fired on the mob, and nobody thought any of these occurrences much out of the common way in the midst of them. The hangman, ever busy and ever worse than useless, was in constant requisition, now stringing up long rows of miscellaneous criminals, now hanging a housebreaker on Saturday who had been taken on Tuesday, now burning people in the hand at Newgate by the dozen, and now burning pamphlets at the door of Westminster Hall. Today, taking the life of an atrocious murderer, and tomorrow of a wretched pilferer who had robbed a farmer's boy of 6 pence. All these things and 1,000 like them came to pass in and close upon the dear old year 1775, environed by them while the woodman and the farmer worked unheeded. Those 2 of the large jaws, and those other 2 of the plain and the fair faces, trod with stir enough, and carried their divine rights with a high hand. Thus did the year 1775 conduct their greatnesses and myriads of small creatures, the creatures of the chronicle among the rest, along the roads that lay before them. So again, first chapter, the period, it's just really Charles Dickens setting the scene good. He is laying the scene out before us. He is showing us what point of history we are. And again, as he mentioned, okay, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You can honestly summarize the entire chapter. Okay, it's Pressy writing. You can summarize it to this one sentence. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Things were very, very extreme. The rich were very rich, the poor were very poor, the noble, the glorious were very glorious, the miserable were very miserable. And fate and death were working hard. They were working quietly, but they were waiting for their work to be rewarded, basically, okay? That is chapter 1, all right, the period. And then we go to chapter 2, the mail. Now, this is still in book the first. Again, Recalled to Life is the name of book the first, and it's very important that you remember this. Recalled to Life will be one of the most important statements in this first part, and actually in the rest of the novel as well. So, book the first, Recalled to Life, we're in chapter 2, the mail. Now, the mail, guys, it's basically a carriage, okay? So, when you think of mail now, we think of emails, we think of letters, but the mail is actually a carriage, and it doesn't only deliver letters, it delivers people, okay? It brings one person from one place to another. So let us begin. And this chapter is very cool because Dickens describes the environment very, very well. The thing about Dickens is that he's very cinematic. He is very good at describing places. Okay, he's very, very good at describing places, and he really sets the scene in this chapter. It was the Dover Road that lay on a Friday night late in November, before the first of the persons with whom this history has business. The Dover Road lay as to him beyond the Dover Mail, as it lumbered up Shooter's Hill, so the carriage, the mail, is going up a hill. He walked uphill in the mire by the side of the mail, as the rest of the passengers did, not because they had the least relish for walking exercise under the circumstances, but because the hill and the harness and the mud and the mail were all so heavy that the horses had 3 times already come to a stop, besides once drawing the coach across the road with a mutinous intent of taking it back to Black Heath. Reins and whip and coachman and guard, however, in combination, had read that article of war which forbade a purpose otherwise strongly in favor of the argument that some brute animals are endued with reason, and the team had capitulated and returned to their duty. With drooping heads and tremulous tails, they mashed their way through the thick mud, floundering and stumbling between whiles as if they were falling to pieces at the larger joints. As often as the driver rested them and brought them to a stand with a wary "Wo-ho, so-ho then," the near leader violently shook his head and everything upon it, like an unusually emphatic horse, denying that the coach could be got up the hill. Whenever the leader made this rattle, a passenger started, as a nervous passenger might, and was disturbed in mind. So the carriage is trying to go up the hill, but it's so heavy already, and it's so kind of muddy, and the horses are so tired that they're struggling to make their way up the hill. There was a steaming mist in all the hollows, and it had roamed in its forlornness up the hill, like an evil spirit seeking rest and finding none. A clammy and intensely cold mist, it made its slow way through the air in ripples that visibly followed and overspread one another as the waves of an unwholesome sea might do. It was dense enough to shut out everything from the light of the coach lamps, but these its own workings, and a few yards of road, and the reek of the laboring horses steamed into it as if they had made it all. So there's mist coming in, and it's so thick. It's so thick that it almost appears as if it's extinguishing the light from the lamps. 2 other passengers besides the one were plodding up the hill by the side of the mail. All 3 were wrapped to the cheekbones and over the ears and wore jack boots. Not one of the 3 could have said from anything he saw what either of the other 2 was like, and each was hidden under almost as many wrappers from the eyes of the mind as from the eyes of the body of his 2 companions. In those days, travelers were very shy of being confidential on a short notice, for anybody on the road might be a robber or in league with robbers. As to the latter, when every posting house and alehouse could produce somebody in the captain's pay, ranging from the landlord to the lowest stable nondescript, it was the likeliest thing upon the cards. So the guard of the Dover Mail thought to himself that Friday night in November 1775, lumbering up Shooter's Hill, as he stood on his own particular perch behind the mail, beating his feet, and keeping an eye and a hand on the arm chest before him, where a loaded blunderbuss lay at the top of 6 or 8 loaded horse pistols, deposited on a substratum of cutlass. So the passengers, guys, of the carriage, they were so bundled up. They were bundled up good. Everything was covered except for their eyes, okay? Because it was cold, it was wet, and you have to be very careful when you're traveling. It's a very dangerous time, you can be robbed. You don't know, you're traveling with strangers. You don't know who they are. They could be dangerous. So really imagine it. Really imagine the mist and the carriage and the sounds and the smell. Dickens is so descriptive good. It's like a movie, Judd. The Dover Mail was in its usual genial position that the guard suspected the passengers suspected one another, and the guard, they all suspected everybody else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horses, as to which cattle he could with a clear conscience have taken his oath on the 2 testaments that they were not fit for the journey. So everyone was kind of looking at each other suspiciously, and no one trusted each other. The only thing you'd know that was trusted were the horses, and even then, the only thing he was sure of about them was that they weren't strong enough to make it up the hill. "Wo-ho," said the coachman, "so then, one more pull and you're at the top, and be damned to you, for I have had trouble enough to get you to it. Joe." "Halloa," the guard replied. "What o'clock do you make it, Joe?" 10 minutes good past 11, so it's almost midnight. "My blood," ejaculated the vexed coachman, "and not atop of Shooters yet. Tst, yeah, get on with you." The emphatic horse, cut short by the whip in a most decided negative, made a scramble for it, and the 3 other horses followed suit. Once more the Dover Mail struggled on, with the jackboots of its passengers squashing along by its side. They had stopped when the coach stopped, and they had kept close company with it. If any one of the three had had the hardihood to propose to another to walk on a little ahead into the mist and darkness, he would have put himself in a fair way of getting shot instantly as a highwayman. The last burst carried the mail to the summit of the hill. The horses stopped to breathe again, and the guard got down to skid the wheel for the descent and open the coach door to let the passengers in. "Psst, Joe," cried the coachman in a warning voice, looking down from his box. "What do you say, Tom?" They both listened. "I say a horse at a canter coming up, Joe." "I say a horse at a gallop, Tom," returned the guard, leaving his hold of the door and mounting nimbly to his place. "Gentlemen, in the king's name, all of you." With this hurried adjuration, he cocked his blunderbuss and stood on the offensive, okay? So they're traveling in this thick mist. It's close to midnight. And suddenly, they hear the sound of a horse running towards them. Okay, and because they hear the sound of a horse running towards them, everyone in the carriage is like, get ready. They pointed their guns forward. They're getting ready for an attack, okay? The passenger booked by this history was on the coach step, getting in. The two other passengers were close behind him and about to follow. He remained on the step, half in the coach and half out of it. They remained in the road below him. They all looked from the coachman to the guard, and from the guard to the coachman, and listened. The coachman looked back, and the guard looked back, and even the emphatic leader pricked up his ears and looked back without contradicting. The stillness consequent of the cessation of the rumbling and laboring of the coach, added to the stillness of the night, made it very quiet indeed. The panting of the horses communicated a tremulous motion to the coach, as if it were in a state of agitation. The hearts of the passengers beat loud enough, perhaps, to be heard, but at any rate the quiet pause was audibly expressive of people out of breath, and holding the breath, and having the pulses quickened by expectation. The sound of a horse at a gallop came fast and furiously up the hill. "So ho!" the guard sang out as loud as he could roar. "Yo there, stand, I shall fire." The pace was suddenly checked, and with much splashing and floundering, a man's voice called from the mist, "Is that the Dover mail?" "Never you mind what it is," the guard retorted. "What are you?" "Is that the Dover mail?" "Why do you want to know?" "I want a passenger if it is." "What passenger?" "Mr. Jarvis Lorry." So the man on the horse was running towards the Dover mail. He called for a name. He said, "I need to talk to one of the passengers, Mr. Jarvis Lorry." Our booked passenger showed in a moment that it was his name. The guard, the coachman, and the two other passengers eyed him distrustfully. "Keep where you are," the guard called to the voice in the mist, "because if I should make a mistake, it could never be set right in your lifetime. Gentleman of the name of Lorry, answer straight." "What is the matter?" asked the passenger then, with mildly quivering speech. "Who wants me? Is it Jerry?" "I don't like Jerry's voice if it is Jerry," growled the guard to himself. "He's hoarser than suits me. It's Jerry." "Yes, Mr. Lorry. What is the matter?" Okay, so the messenger that comes said, "I need to talk to a passenger. I need to talk to Mr. Jarvis Lorry." And one of the passengers is named Mr. Jarvis Lorry. And he came out and he said, "Who is there to see me? Is it Jerry?" And then the messenger said, "Yes, I am Jerry. A dispatch sent after you from over yonder. T and Co." "I know this messenger, guard," said Mr. Lorry, getting down into the road, assisted from behind more swiftly than politely by the two other passengers, who immediately scrambled into the coach, shut the door, and pulled up the window. "He may come close. There's nothing wrong." "I hope there ain't, but I can't make so nation sure of that," said the guard, in gruff soliloquy. "Hullo, you." "Well, and hullo you," said Jerry, more hoarsely than before. "Come on at a foot pace. Do you mind me? And if you've got holsters to that saddle o' yourn, don't let me see your hand go nigh 'em, for I am a devil at a quick mistake, and when I make one it takes the form of lead. So now let's look at you." The figures of a horse and rider came slowly through the eddying mist, and came to the side of the mail where the passenger stood. The rider stooped, and casting up his eyes at the guard, handed the passenger a small folded paper. The rider's horse was blown, and both horse and rider were covered with mud, from the hoofs of the horse to the hat of the man. "Guard," said the passenger in a tone of quiet business confidence. The watchful guard, with his right hand at the stock of his raised blunderbuss, his left at the barrel, and his eye on the horseman, answered curtly, "There is nothing to apprehend. I belong to Tellson's Bank. You must know Tellson's Bank in London. I am going to Paris on business. A crown to drink. I may read this, okay? So, Jerry is a messenger, and he delivered a letter to a man named Jarvis Lorry, okay? And he said it was from where he worked. It was from his bank, okay? And then Jarvis Lorry took the letter and he was going to read it. He asked for permission from the coachman that if he could read it. He opened it in the light of the coach lamp on that side and read first to himself and then aloud, "Wait at Dover for Mamselle. It's not long, you see, guard Jerry. Say that my answer was recalled to life." Okay? So Jerry hands Mr. Lorry a letter, and Mr. Lorry asks permission if he can read it. And then he does read it, okay? And what does it say? He opened it in the light of the coach lamp on that side, and read, first to himself and then aloud, "Wait at Dover for Mamselle. It's not long, you see, guard. Jerry, say that my answer was recalled to life." Jerry started in his saddle. "That's a blazing strange answer too," said he at his horses. So Mr. Lorry got the message and it said that she is waiting for you. Mamselle is waiting for you. Okay, and he then gives a message to Jerry, and his message are the words "recalled to life." And recalled to life basically means brought back to life, guys. Resurrected, okay? If you say that someone's recalled to life, they were dead, and you're calling them back to life. That is the message that Mr. Jarvis Lorry gave to Jerry the messenger, okay? As his reply. And we also found out that Mr. Jarvis Lorry is from London. He is a banker, and he is also, but he is traveling to Paris to meet a mamselle, to meet a woman. "Take that message back and they will know that I received this, as well as if I wrote. Make the best of your way. Good night." With those words, the passenger opened the coach door and got in, not all assisted by his fellow passengers, who had expeditiously secreted their watches and purses in their boots, and were now making a general pretense of being asleep, with no more definite purpose than to escape the hazard of originating any other kind of action. The coach lumbered on again with heavier wreaths of mist closing round it as it began the descent. The guard soon replaced his blunderbuss in his arm chest, and having looked to the rest of its contents, and having looked to the supplementary pistols that he wore in his belt, looked to a smaller chest beneath his seat, in which there were a few smith stools, a couple of torches, and a tinder box. For he was furnished with that completeness that if the coach lamps had been blown and stormed out, which did occasionally happen, he had only to shut himself up inside, keep the flint and steel sparks well off the straw, and get a light with tolerable safety and ease, if he were lucky, in 5 minutes. Tom softly over the coach roof. "Hello, Joe. Did you hear the message?" "I did, Joe." "What did you make of it, Tom?" "Nothing at all, Joe." "That's a coincidence too," the guard mused, "for I made the same of it myself." So the coachman heard the message, recalled to life, and they're like, what does that mean? They're wondering what it means. Jerry, okay, the messenger, left alone in the mist and darkness, dismounted meanwhile, not only to ease his spent horse, but to wipe the mud from his face and shake the wet out of his hat brim, which might be capable of holding about half a gallon. After standing with the bridle over his heavily splashed arm until the wheels of the mail were no longer within hearing, and the night was quite still again, he turned to walk down the hill. So Jerry the messenger got this message recalled to life, and he just kind of paused, and he waited for the mail to disappear in the mist. No, it was very quiet and spooky again. After that there galloped from Temple Bar, old lady, I won't trust your forelegs till I get you on the level, said this horse messenger, glancing at his mare. Recalled to life. That's a blazing strange message. Much of that wouldn't do for you, Jerry, I say, Jerry. You'd be in a blazing bad way if recalling to life was come into fashion. Jerry. Okay, so Jerry's talking to himself and he's saying, what a weird message, recalled to life. And he said, it will be very unlucky for you. And he's talking to himself, it's very unlucky for you if people could come back to life. If coming back to life was really a thing, you would be very unlucky. Okay? And that's the end of chapter 2, guys. Okay? And the thing about chapter 2, no, is that it already introduces what a genius Charles Dickens is. And I know you don't see it yet, okay? But there are things in this chapter that are already very important to the rest of the story. The thing about Charles Dickens is even though he was releasing things chapter by chapter, he had a plan, okay? And this chapter 2, he's already setting that plan in motion. He's already giving hints to plot twists that will happen later on in the novel. Okay, but right now what we do have is we have a banker named Laurie, a messenger named Jerry, and we have the secret message recalled to life. And as I mentioned before, Teacher Kiara and I we love this story very, very much. And so we have this dream casting good. We have this movie that we wish would actually come true, that would actually happen. And of course, we cast everyone in the movie. So this is our Jarvis Laurie, si Martin Freeman. Bilbo, he's the perfect Laurie for us. Good. Okay, so this is our banker. All right, and our cruncher, Jerry, okay, the messenger, Jerry Cruncher, that's his name. We cast Adam Driver. So you don't have to follow our casting, but you can imagine these actors, no? Again, and the thing about Dickens is his writing style is very cinematic. He's very descriptive. So imagine it like a movie, and you're gonna need actors for your imagination, and Teacher Karen and I can supply them for you. Okay, and again, remember these words good, they're very important. Recalled to life. That's a blazing strange message. Much of that wouldn't do for you, Jerry. I say, Jerry, you'd be in a blazing bad way if recalling to life was to come into fashion, Jerry. And then we move on to chapter 3, The Night Shadows. A wonderful fact to reflect upon, that every human creature is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other. A solemn consideration when I enter a great city by night, that every one of those darkly clustered houses encloses its own secret, that every room and every one of them encloses its own secret, that every beating heart in the hundreds of thousands of breasts there is, in some of its imaginings, a secret to the heart nearest it. Something of the awfulness, even of death itself, is referable to this. No more can I turn the leaves of this dear book that I loved and vainly hope in time to read it all. No more can I look into the depths of this unfathomable water wherein, as momentary lights glanced into it, I have had glimpses of buried treasure and other things submerged. It was appointed that the book should shut with a spring forever and forever, when I had read but a page. It was appointed that the water should be locked in an eternal frost, when the light was playing on its surface, and I stood in ignorance on the shore. My friend is dead, my neighbor is dead, my love, the darling of my soul, is dead. It is the inexorable consolidation and perpetuation of the secret that was always in that individuality, and which I shall carry in mine to my life's end. In any of the burial places of the city through which I pass, is there a sleeper more inscrutable than its busy inhabitants are, in their innermost personality to me, or than I am to them. As to this, his natural and not to be alienated inheritance, the messenger on horseback had exactly the same possession as the king, the first minister of state, or the richest merchant in London. So with the 3 passengers shut up in the narrow compass of one lumbering old mail coach, they were mysteries to one another, as complete as if each had been in his own coach and 6, or his own coach and 60, with the breadth of a county between him and the next. The messenger rode back at an easy trot, stopping pretty often at alehouses by the way to drink, but evincing a tendency to keep his own counsel and to keep his hat cocked over his eyes. He had eyes that assorted very well with that decoration being of a surface black, with no depth in the color or form, and much too near together as if they were afraid of being found out in something singly, as if they kept too far apart. They had a sinister expression under an old cocked hat like a 3-cornered spittoon, and over a great muffler for the chin and throat, which descended nearly to the wearer's knees. When he stopped for drink, he moved this muffler with his left hand, only while he poured his liquor in with his right. As soon as that was done, he muffled again. So we get the description of Jerry Cruncher, the messenger, and what he looks like. "No, Jerry, no," said the messenger, harping on one theme as he rode. "It wouldn't do for you, Jerry. Jerry, you honest tradesman, it wouldn't suit your line of business. Recalled, bust me if I don't think he'd been a drinking." So he's again talking to himself, okay, and talking about, oh my, if someone can be resurrected, it will be bad for your business. His message perplexed his mind to that degree that he was fain several times to take off his hat to scratch his head. Except on the crown, which was raggedly bald, he had stiff black hair standing jaggedly all over it and growing downhill almost to his broad blunt nose. It was so like Smith's work, so much more like the top of a strongly spiked wall than a head of hair, that the best of players at Leapfrog might have declined him as the most dangerous man in the world to go over. So Jerry's hair is very, very spiky. It's very, very sharp. Murag Kirishima. While he trotted back with the message he was to deliver to the night watchman in his box at the door of Tellson's Bank by Temple Bar, who was to deliver it to greater authorities within, the shadows of the night took such shapes to him as arose out of the message, and took such shapes to the mare as arose out of her private topics of uneasiness. They seemed to be numerous, for she sighed at every shadow on the road. Okay, so it was very, very dark, alright? It was very, very dark. It was very, very spooky as he was traveling. Because if you remember, it was very close to midnight. What time the mail coach lumbered, jolted, rattled, and bumped upon its tedious way, with its three fellow inscrutables inside, to whom likewise the shadows of the night revealed themselves in the forms their dozing eyes and wandering thoughts suggested. Tellson's Bank had a run upon it in the mail, as the bank passenger, with an arm drawn through the leathern strap, which did what lay in it to keep him from pounding against the next passenger, and driving him into the corner whenever the coach got a special jolt, nodded in his place with half-shut eyes, the little coach windows, and the coach lamp dimly gleaming through them, and the bulky bundle of the opposite passenger, became the bank, and did a great stroke of business. The rattle of the harness was the chink of money, and more drafts were honored in 5 minutes than even Tellson's, with all its foreign and home connection, ever paid in thrice the time. Then the strong rooms underground at Tellson's, with such of their valuable stores and secrets as were known to the passenger, and was not a little that he knew about them, opened before him, and he went in among them with the great keys and the feebly burning candle, and found them safe and strong and sound, and still just as he had last seen them. Okay, now what's so cool, guys, now we're kind of entering a bank, and usually, a bank isn't the most exciting place. But in this time, okay, a bank was not only a place where people stored money. A bank is a place where people stored secrets, okay? The thing about banks are the most valuable thing in banks isn't money, it's actually secrets, because it's in banks that there are documents, there are last will and testaments, there are secret relatives, okay, and there's so many secrets in a bank. Good. And so the thing that a bank is it doesn't only deal with money, it deals with secrets. And the whole point of this chapter, the night shadows, are the secrets that we keep from each other, where you can literally be beside someone and you don't know what their deepest and darkest secrets are. But though the bank was almost always with him, and though the coach, in a confused way, like the presence of pain under an opiate, was always with him, there was another current of impression that never ceased to run all throughout the night. He was on his way to dig someone out of a grave. Now, which of the multitude of faces that showed themselves before him was the true face of the buried person? The shadows of the night did not indicate, but they were all faces of a man of 45 by years, and they differed principally in the passions they expressed, and in the ghastliness of their worn and wasted state. Pride, contempt, defiance, stubbornness, submission, lamentation succeeded one another, so did varieties of sunken cheek, cadaverous color, emaciated hands and figures. But the face was in the main one face, and every head was prematurely white. 100 times the dozing passenger inquired of the spectre. So we go from Jerry, we go to Mr. Lorry, who's still traveling in the carriage, and he keeps having nightmares about this message, no, recalled to life. Like the theme of the first book, good guys, is resurrection. Okay, and Mr. Lorry keeps having nightmares that he's digging someone out of a grave. He's resurrecting someone, and he dreams that of a face looking at him, brought back to life, and them having a conversation together. Buried? How long? The answer was always the same, almost 18 years. You had abandoned all hope of being dug out long ago. You know that you are recalled to life. They tell me so. I hope you care to live. I can't say. Shall I show her to you? Will you come and see her? So this conversation, it's so cool. Okay, he's having nightmares where he brings someone to life and they're having a conversation. Okay, and this is the conversation. No? Again, I'll read it out loud. Buried how long? The answer was always the same, almost 18 years. You had abandoned all hope of being dug out long ago. You know that you are recalled to life. They tell me so. I hope you care to live. I can't say. Shall I show her to you? Will you come and see her? So it's so cool. We know Laurie is from London, but he's meeting someone from France. Okay, he's in France now, and he's meeting a girl, and then he's talking to this nightmare version of a resurrected man and saying that I will show her to you. The answer to these questions were various and contradictory. Sometimes the broken reply was, wait, it would kill me if I saw her too soon. Sometimes it was given in a tender rain of tears, and then it was, take me to her. Sometimes it was staring and bewildered, and then it was, I don't know her, I don't understand. After such imaginary discourse, the passenger in his fancy would dig and dig, now with a spade, now with a great key, now with his hands, to dig this wretched creature out. Got out at last, with earth hanging about his face and hair, he would suddenly fall away to dust. The passenger would then start to himself and lower the window to get the reality of mist and rain on his cheek. Yet even when his eyes were opened on the mist and rain, on the moving patch of light from the lamps, and the hedge at the roadside retreating by jerks, the night shadows outside the coach would fall into the train of the night shadows within. The real banking house by Temple Bar, the real business of the past day, the real strong rooms, the real express sent after him, and the real message returned would all be there. Out of the midst of them, the ghostly face would rise, and he would accost it again. So we kept having nightmares the whole night. Buried how long? Almost 18 years. I hope you care to live. I can't say. Dig, until an impatient movement from one of the two passengers would admonish him to pull up the window, draw his arm securely through the leathern strap, and speculate upon the two slumbering forms until his mind lost its hold of them, and they again slid away into the bank and the grave. Buried how long? Almost 18 years. You had abandoned all hope of being dug out long ago. The words were still in his hearing as just spoken, distinctly in his hearing as ever spoken words had been in his life, when the weary passenger started to the consciousness of daylight and found that the shadows of the night were gone. He lowered the window and looked out at the rising sun. There was a ridge of plowed land with a plow upon it where it had been left last night when the horses were unyoked. Beyond a quiet coppice wood in which many leaves of burning red and golden yellow still remained upon the trees. Though the earth was cold and wet, the sky was clear and the sun rose bright, placid and beautiful. 18 years, said the passenger, looking at the sun. Gracious creator of day, to be buried alive for 18 years. So he keeps dreaming about resurrecting someone who's been dead for 18 years, okay? To be buried alive for 18 years. That's Mr. Lorry, okay? And then we go to chapter 4, okay? And this is the final chapter that present Teacher Ingong is reading. Past Teacher Ingong will take over afterwards, okay? And this is actually the only video in this series, that will have the intro as the other. This is gonna be one long video, guys, okay? So I'm gonna show the intro, the official Lit is Lit intro. You saw it at the beginning of this video, and then the rest of the Tale of Two Cities videos won't have that intro, no, because you should kind of view it as one long experience. And then I'll also only put the outro, the final outro, in the last chapter good of the book. So this is the, in a way, kind of the last chapter that present day Teacher Ingong will read with you, but past Teacher Ingong will be there for you, as well as Teacher Kiara. We will read the rest of the book together, okay? So here's the thing. One thing I do like about it. Now, we always read this book, usually, we read it face to face with the students, but we're doing it online. And the thing is, one good thing about reading it online, guys, is that I can tell you to pause the video and read the boring parts on your own, okay? And without a doubt, good, there are a few pages in chapter 4 that's a little bit boring, and I actually really hate reading it out loud, good, when it's in class. But thankfully, one nice thing about it is I can say, okay, pause the video, read it with your eyes, and you can read through the next few pages quickly, guys, okay? Trust me. You have to understand it, but it's basically just Mr. Lorry arriving in an inn, arriving in a place where he will meet this mystery woman. Okay, so I want you to pause the video, and you're going to read on your own, and then replay the video once you reach a certain part. And I'm going to tell you what part that is. Okay, so you're going to start reading chapter 4, and then you're going to replay the video when you reach this part. A bottle of good claret after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm, okay? So once you reach that sentence, a bottle of good claret after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm, okay? So pause the video, read up to that point. A bottle of good claret after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm. So it's the start of a new paragraph, a bottle, okay? So once you hear that line, then you can replay this video. Okay, unpause. So I'm assuming you read, and I know it's a little bit boring, those pages. It's setting the scene. It's describing this place, and I don't know, it's describing Mr. Lorry and him, getting out of his wet clothes, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't like that part. Okay, so let's go through it now. A bottle of good claret after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm. Otherwise, then, as it has a tendency to throw him out of work. Mr. Lorry had been idle a long time, like us. Yeah, you see, it's a boring first few pages, but it gets really good. Mr. Lorry had been idle a long time and had just poured out his last glassful of wine with as complete an appearance of satisfaction as is ever to be found in an elderly gentleman of a fresh complexion who has got to the end of a bottle, when a rattling of wheels came up the narrow street and rumbled into the inn yard, okay? So we know he's waiting for this mystery woman, and we hear a carriage arriving. He set down his glass untouched. "This is Mamselle," said he. In a very few minutes the waiter came in to announce that Miss Manette had arrived from London and would be happy to see the gentleman from Tellson's. So soon? Miss Manette had taken some refreshment on the road and required none then, and was extremely anxious to see the gentleman from Tellson's immediately, if it suited his pleasure and convenience. The gentleman from Tellson's had nothing left for it but to empty his glass with an air of stolid desperation, settle his odd little flaxen wig at the ears, and follow the waiter to Miss Manette's apartment. It was a large, dark room, furnished in a funereal manner with black horsehair, and loaded with heavy, dark tables. These had been oiled and oiled until the 2 tall candles on the table in the middle of the room were gloomily reflected on every leaf as if they were buried in deep graves of black mahogany, and no light to speak of could be expected from them until they were dug out. The obscurity was so difficult to penetrate that Mr. Lorry, picking his way over the well-worn Turkey carpet, supposed Miss Manette to be, for the moment, in some adjacent room, until having got past the 2 tall candles, he saw, standing to receive him by the table between them and the fire, a young lady of not more than 17 in a riding cloak, and still holding her straw travelling hat by its ribbon in her hand. As his eyes rested on a short, slight, pretty figure, a quantity of golden hair, a pair of blue eyes that met his own with an inquiring look, and a forehead with a singular capacity, remembering how young and smooth it was, of lifting and knitting itself into an expression that was not quite one of perplexity, or wonder, or alarm, or merely of a bright, fixed attention, though it included all the four expressions. As his eyes rested on these things, a sudden, vivid likeness passed before him of a child whom he had held in his arms on the passage across that very channel, one cold time when the hail drifted heavily and the sea ran high. The likeness passed away, say, like a breath along the surface of the gaunt pier glass behind her, on the frame of which a hospital procession of Negro cupids, several headless and all cripples, were offering black baskets of dead sea fruit to black divinities of the feminine gender, and he made his formal bow to Miss Manette. Okay, so he sees Miss Manette, guys. And she is blonde and she is pretty, and he sees her and he has this memory he had of holding her when she was a baby. Okay, so we have, good guys, the characters, we're just getting introduced to characters, no, but they already have these kind of secret connections with each other. And so we meet Miss Lucy Manette in this dark room, and she's angelic, she's golden, she's beautiful, and Mr. Lorry has this flashback of him holding her when she was a baby. "Pray take a seat, sir," in a very clear and pleasant young voice, a little foreign in its accent, but a very little indeed. "I kiss your hand, miss," said Mr. Lorry with the manners of an earlier date, as he made his formal bow again and took his seat. "I received a letter from the bank, sir, yesterday, informing me that some new intelligence or discovery, the word is not material, miss, either word will do, respecting the small property of my poor father whom I never saw, so long dead." Mr. Lorry moved in his chair and cast a troubled look towards the hospital procession of Negro cupids, as if they had any help for anybody in their absurd baskets. "Rendered it necessary that I should go to Paris there to communicate with a gentleman of the bank, so good as to be dispatched to Paris for the purpose." Okay, so Lucy Manette got a message from the bank of Mr. Lorry that she had to meet a banker in that area. Okay, and so she came quickly, and she knows that it is about her father who has been dead for a very long time. Something has been found out about her father, and so she rushed, and she's meeting Mr. Lorry now. "Myself, as I was prepared to hear, sir," she curtsied to him. Young ladies made curtsies in those days with a pretty desire to convey to him that she felt how much older and wiser he was than she. He made her another bow. "I replied to the bank, sir, that as it was considered necessary by those who know and who are so kind as to advise me that I should go to France, and that as I am an orphan and have no friend who could go with me, I should esteem it highly if I might be permitted to place myself, during the journey, under that worthy gentleman's protection. The gentleman had left London, but I think a messenger was sent after him to beg the favour of his waiting for me here. I was happy," said Mr. Lorry, "to be entrusted with a charge. I shall be more happy to execute it." "Sir, I thank you indeed. I thank you very gratefully. It was told me by the bank that the gentleman would explain to me the details of the business, and that I must prepare myself to find them of a surprising nature. I have done my best to prepare myself, and I naturally have a strong and eager interest to know what they are." "Naturally," said Mr. Lorry. "Yes, I—" After a pause, he added, again settling the crisp flaxen wig at the ears, "It is very difficult to begin." He did not begin, but in his indecision met her glance. The young forehead lifted itself into that singular expression, but it was pretty and characteristic, besides being singular, and she raised her hand as if with an involuntary action she caught at, or stayed, some passing shadow. "Are you quite a stranger to me, sir?" "Am I not?" Mr. Lorry opened his hands and extended them outward with an argumentative smile. Between the eyebrows and just over the little feminine nose, the line of which was as delicate and fine as it was possible to be, the expression deepened itself as she took her seat thoughtfully in the chair by which she had hitherto remained standing. He watched her as she mused, and the moment she raised her eyes, again went on. "In your adopted country, I presume I cannot do better than address you as a young English lady, Miss Manette." Okay, so Mr. Lorry took a step closer to her, and Lucy kind of like do I know you, sir? Have I met you before? And we know that he did see her when she was a baby, and Lucy kind of has a very faint memory of it. If you please, sir, Miss Manette, I am a man of business. I have a business charge to acquit myself of. In your reception of it, don't heed me any more than if I was a speaking machine. Truly, I am not much else. I will, with your leave, relate to you, miss, the story of one of our customers. Okay, so he says, I'm here to tell you a story. Okay, and he said, I am a banker, I am professional, I am not gonna get emotionally involved, I will just tell you the story as a businessman. And you're gonna notice this about Mr. Lorry, guys. He always says he's a only businessman good. Let's see if he's right. Let's see if he really is like a machine. Because for him, he's a banker. He's on banker's duty. Let's see if that's really all he is, okay? Story. He seemed willfully to mistake the word she had repeated. When he added in a hurry, yes, customers in the banking business, we usually call our connection our customers. He was a French gentleman, a scientific gentleman, a man of great acquirements, a doctor. So Mr. Lorry begins to tell Lucy about one of their customers, a doctor, a French doctor. Not of Beauvais. Why, yes, of Beauvais. Like Monsieur Manette, your father, the gentleman was of Beauvais. Like Monsieur Manette, your father, the gentleman was of repute in Paris. I had the honor of knowing him there. Our relations were business relations, but confidential. I was at that time in our French house and had been, 20 years. At that time, I may ask at what time, sir? I speak, miss, of 20 years ago. He married an English lady, and I was one of the trustees. His affairs, like the affairs of many other French gentlemen and French families, were entirely in Tellson's hand. In a similar way I am, or I have been, trustee of one kind or others for scores of our customers. These are mere business relations, miss. There is no friendship in them, no particular interest, nothing like sentiment. I have passed from one to another in the course of my business life, just as I pass from one of our customers to another in the course of my business day. In short, I have no feelings, I am a mere machine to go on. But this is my father's story, and I begin to think, the curiously roughened forehead was very intent upon him, that when I was left an orphan through my mother surviving my father only 2 years, it was you who brought me to England. I am almost sure it was you. So Lucy remembers she lived in France with her father and mother, and Mr. Lorry was the one that took her to England after her mother and father died. Mr. Lorry took the hesitating little hand that confidingly advanced to take his, and he put it with some ceremony to his lips. He then conducted the young lady straightway to her chair again, and, holding the chair back with his left hand and using his right by turns to rub his chin, pull his wig at the ears, or point what he said, stood looking down into her face while she sat looking up into his. Miss Manette, it was I, and you will see how truly I spoke of myself just now in saying I had no feelings and that all the relations I hold with my fellow creatures are mere business relations. When you reflect that I have never seen you since, no, you have been the ward of Tellson's house since, and I have been busy with the other business of Tellson's house since. Feelings. I have no time for them, no chance of them. I pass my whole life, miss, in turning an immense pecuniary mangle. After this odd description of his daily routine of employment, Mr. Lorry flattened his flaxen wig upon his head with both hands, which was most unnecessary, for nothing could be flatter than its shining surface was before, and resumed his former attitude. So far, miss, as you have remarked, this is the story of your regretted father. Now comes the difference. If your father had not died when he did, don't be frightened how you start. She did indeed start, and she caught his wrist with both her hands. Pray, said Mr. Lorry in a soothing tone, bringing his left hand from the back of the chair to lay it on the supplicatory fingers that clasped him in so violent a tremble. Pray, control your agitation, a matter of business. As I was saying, her look so discomposed him that he stopped, wondered, and began anew. As I was saying, if Monsieur Manette had not died, if he had suddenly and silently disappeared, if he had been spirited away, if it had not been difficult to guess to what dreadful place, though no art could trace him, if he had an enemy in some compatriot who could exercise a privilege that I in my own time have known the boldest people afraid to speak of in a whisper across the water there, for instance, the privilege of filling up blank forms for the consignment of any one to the oblivion of a person for any length of time, if his wife had implored the king, the queen, the court, the clergy for any tidings of him, and all quite in vain, then the history of your father would have been the history of this unfortunate gentleman, the Doctor of Beauvais. I entreat you to tell me more, sir. So basically, the news Mr. Lorry has, it is about her father, okay? Who supposedly died several years ago. I entreat you to tell me more, sir. I am going to. You can bear it. I can bear anything but the uncertainty you leave me in at this moment. You speak collectedly and you are collected. That's good. Though his manner was less satisfied than his words. A matter of business, regard it as a matter of business. Business that must be done. Now, if this doctor's wife, though a lady of great courage and spirit, had suffered so intensely from this cause before her little child was born, the little child was a daughter, sir? A daughter. A matter of business. Don't be distressed. Miss, if the poor lady had suffered so intensely before her little child was born, that she came to the determination of sparing the poor child the inheritance of any part of the agony she had known the pains of, by rearing her in the belief that her father was dead. No, don't kneel, in heaven's name. Why should you kneel to me? For the truth, oh dear, good, compassionate sir, for the truth. So Mr. Lorry said, nga, your father isn't dead. Your father just disappeared. He got a fate that some would say is worse than death, and your mother covered it up from you. And Lucy is like, she's freaking out because she wants to know if her father is alive or not. Without a matter of business, you confuse me, and how can I transact business if I am confused? Let us be clear-headed. If you could kindly mention now, for instance, what 9 times 9 pence are, or how many shillings and 20 guineas, it would be so encouraging. I should be so much more at my ease about your state of mind. So Lucy is so emotional, and Mr. Lorry is trying to be professional, but he's also getting very emotional. The more emotion Lucy shows, the more emotional Mr. Lorry gets. Without directly answering to this appeal, she sat so still when he had very gently raised her, and the hands that had not ceased to clasp his wrists were so much more steady than they had been, that she communicated some reassurance to Mr. Jarvis Lorry. That's right. Courage, business. You have business before you. Useful business, Miss Manette. Your mother took this course with you, and when she died, I believe, broken-hearted, having never slackened her unavailing search for your father, she left you at 2 years old to grow to be blooming, beautiful, and happy, without the dark cloud upon you of living in uncertainty whether your father soon wore his heart out in prison, or wasted there through many lingering years. So the mother good wanted to hide the father from Lucy. He disappeared. He was supposedly imprisoned, and she didn't want Lucy to grow up not knowing what happened to her father. And so they kind of deceived Lucy into thinking that he was dead. Good. Okay? As he said the words, he looked down with an admiring pity on the flowing golden hair, as if he pictured to himself that it might have been already tinged with gray. You know that your parents had no great possession, and that what they had was secured to your mother and to you. There has been no new discovery of money or of any other property. But he felt his wrist held closer, and he stopped. The expression in the forehead, which had so particularly attracted his notice, and which was now immovable, had deepened into one of pain and horror. But he has been found. He is alive, greatly changed, it is too probable, almost a wreck. It is possible, though we will hope the best. Still alive. Your father has been taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, and we are going there, I to identify him if I can, you to restore him to life, love, duty, rest, and comfort. So, they are English, no? But Lucy is originally from France, and when she was a baby, Mr. Lorry brought her to England, okay? And now, several years pass, 18 years pass, and Mr. Lorry is telling her that your father is alive. The father you thought was dead since you were a baby is actually alive, okay? Again, he has been found. He is alive. Greatly changed this to probable, almost a wreck. It is possible, though we will hope the best. Still alive. Your father has been taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, and we are going there. I to identify him, if I can, you to restore him to life, love, duty, rest, comfort. A shiver ran through her frame, and from it through his. She said in a low, distinct, awe-stricken voice, as if she were saying it in a dream, I am going to see his ghost. It will be his ghost, not him. Mr. Lorry quietly chafed the hands that held his arm. There. See now. The best and the worst are known to you now. You are well on your way to the poor wronged gentleman, and with a fair sea voyage and a fair land journey, you will be soon at his dear side. She repeated in the same tone, sunk to a whisper, I have been free, I have been happy, yet his ghost has never haunted me. Only one thing more, said Mr. Lorry, laying stress upon it as a wholesome means of enforcing her attention. He has been found under another name, his own long forgotten or long concealed. It would be worse than useless now to inquire which, worse than useless to seek to know whether he has been for years overlooked or always designedly held prisoner. It would be worse than useless now to make any inquiries, because it would be dangerous. Better not to mention the subject anywhere or in any way, and to remove him, for a while at all events, out of France. Even I, safe as an Englishman, and even Tellson's, important as they are to French credit, avoid all naming of the matter. I carry about me not a scrap of writing openly referring to it. This is a secret service altogether. My credentials, entries, and memoranda are all comprehended in the one line, recalled to life, which may mean anything. But what is the matter? She doesn't notice a word, Miss Manette. Okay, so he tells her this news that the father she thought was dead for her whole life is actually alive, okay? And he said that we kind of our code for this secret was recalled to life, because it's like he's coming back to life, because everyone thought he was dead, but now it's revealed that he isn't. And he's in Paris, guys. So they are in England, and now they have to go to France in order to get her father. All right? And that's why it's called A Tale of Two Cities. It starts, no? Perfectly still and silent, and not even fallen back in her chair, she sat under his hand, utterly insensible, with her eyes open and fixed upon him, and with that last expression looking as if it were carved or branded into her forehead. So close was her hold upon his arm that he feared to detach himself, lest he should hurt her. Therefore he called out loudly for assistance without moving. Okay, so Lucy, after hearing the news, she fainted. Okay, she fainted because the news was too intense. A wild-looking woman, whom even in his agitation Mr. Lorry observed to be all of a red color and to have red hair and to be dressed in some extraordinary tight-fitting fashion and to have on her head a most wonderful bonnet like a grenadier wooden measure, and good measure too, or a great Stilton cheese, came running into the room in advance of the inn servants, and soon settled the question of his detachment from the poor young lady by laying a brawny hand upon his chest and sending him flying back against the nearest wall. So Lucy faints, guys, and suddenly a huge woman bursts into the room, runs towards Lucy, and then pushes Mr. Lorry away. She pushes him so hard that he flies and hits the wall, okay? So this big news comes about her father being alive. Lucy faints. Mr. Lorry is like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then a huge woman bursts into the room and flings Mr. Lorry away from Lucy. I really think this must be a man, was Mr. Lorry's breathless reflection, simultaneously with his coming against the wall. Why, look at you all, bawled this figure, addressing the inn servants. Why don't you go and fetch things, instead of standing there staring at me? I am not so much to look at, am I? Why don't you go and fetch things? I'll let you know if you don't bring smelling salts, cold water, and vinegar. Quick, I will. There was an immediate dispersal for these restoratives, and she softly laid the patient on a sofa and tended her with great skill and gentleness, calling her my precious and my bird, and spreading her golden hair aside over her shoulders with great pride and care. "And you and Brown," she said indignantly, turning on Mr. Lorry. "Couldn't you tell her what you had to tell her without frightening her to death? Look at her with her pretty pale face and her cold hands. Did you call that being a banker?" So this character, guys, her name is Miss Pross, okay? And Miss Pross is kind of like the governess, the maid, kind of like the nanny of Lucy, okay? She's the one who takes care of Lucy. She's the one who raised Lucy. Her name's Miss Pross, and we hired Meryl Streep for her. Teacher Karen, I cast Meryl Streep for her. Mr. Lorry was so exceedingly disconcerted by a question so hard to answer that he could only look on at a distance with much feebler sympathy and humility, while the strong woman, having banished the inn-servants under the mysterious penalty of letting them know something not mentioned, if they stayed there staring, recovered her charge by a regular series of gradations and coaxed her to lay her drooping head upon her shoulder. "I hope she will do well now," said Mr. Lorry. "No thanks to you and Brown if she does, my darling pretty." "I hope," said Mr. Lorry, after another pause of feeble sympathy and humility, "that you accompany Miss Manette to France." "A likely thing, too," replied the strong woman. "If it was ever intended that I should go across salt water, do you suppose Providence would have cast my lot in an island?" This being another question hard to answer, Mr. Jarvis Lorry withdrew to consider it. Okay, so the first part of the book, that all takes place in England. Okay, and now we're going to France. And we're going to France with Miss Pross, Lucy Manette, and Mr. Jarvis Lorry. And then we also met Jerry Cruncher. He's the messenger in England. And these three, they are going to go to France. Okay, and chapter 5 is the wine shop. You're gonna move on to the next video. Okay, and again, there's not really gonna be intros and outros for this. This should just feel like a long playlist. Okay, so chapter 5, the wine shop, go to the next video on the playlist.